Welcome back to Nat Chat. I'm Barney, if you haven't remembered, and I'm here today with Tim McGrath. And we're, in this little segment, we're having a look at the ongoing struggle of being an original artist who is trying to kind of make a living and trying to manage oneself in this game. These days, a very sort of highly competitive game. I mean, we can see it as competitive or just a highly numbered game. There are certainly a lot of musicians, but when you come to a town like Melbourne, as I'm sure you appreciate, Tim, there are a lot of venues and a lot of opportunities and a lot of places to play. But the big question is, of course, how do you get these gigs?
The first time we came to Melbourne, we got the gigs. The gigs really wasn't the problem. The problem was on my side with the publicity, and to be like a little, just a drop in the ocean, you know, and to make a ripple or to cut through the white noise, you've got to try to get some kind of budget together to get some publicity done.
What do you think is important publicity when it comes to...
Very important.
Well, which kind of publicity do you believe is the most important? Community radio, flyers?
I think TV's the most powerful medium.
Well, yeah, not many bands advertise on TV, so when it comes to local music, what do you think is the most powerful? Going to the pub that you're going to play when you've already booked the gig, plastering it with posters? Different people do it differently, and the level of enthusiasm, some people are a bit lazy on the publicity, aren't they?
Yeah, it might be different in different places. In some places I believe that the lead-in time's important because people sometimes need money to get their money together before the show comes along. And then to try to get a run of shows in different places, that's a whole nother thing, because it's really hard to get a run-up of shows, and then you've got gear and logistics and those.
Do you think it can all be done on the phone, or do you think it's best to have somebody going to the place a month before and actually meeting with the people and knocking on the doors?
It would be good to have people on the ground when it's hard to do that. And when you've got a band, sometimes people ask a lot of questions like, you know, does this venue, you know, and you're like, I don't know, you know. I'm sure that a venue that puts bands on would have PowerPoints and things like this.
Well, out in the country, of course, anything can happen.
Well, yeah, you know, like coming from a sort of a place like that, you come to Melbourne and you've got PA already set up, you've got sound people.
PAs in Melbourne are fantastic.
The sound people are really good. All that side of it's all done. You know, it's all ready to go. It's the... Now
that's the staging side of it. It is a very, very interesting point with bands and management, because as we well know, a lot of bands can really ride a great wave of enthusiasm and inspiration, but can fall apart through either lack of success or going stale or finding they're sort of getting nowhere or not getting gigs. So it's so important for bands to have either that outside member, a manager. Now, sometimes bands are very, very crafty and they co-manage together and they do it very well. They all have different skills. Other times, bands can be full of people who just really want to play music. And that's when you look at some of the big bands around the world over history, they've always had a manager. This separate person who sometimes ends up in the photo, sometimes ends up a household name with the band, sometimes not. And it takes the onus off the band, and it means that all sorts of decisions and things can actually be made about the band's progress without the band feeling like they have to make those decisions. Is that a situation you'd like to find yourself in? Would you like an outside manager?
I think that it's important, you know, because I think when you get to a point that when you're trying to concentrate on the band and also trying to concentrate on external things that are still to do with the band, and then other external things like publicity and
that's right,
and things. An external person could write all that down for you, you know, as in like today at this time you're going to do this radio thing, or you're going to get your photos taken here. And it's one thing I've learned along the way is to try to get photos taken in places with people that you meet.
Good.
as a
Good.
record of where you've been.
And of course, pushing. Here's a CD, for instance, that Tim has produced, and it's one thing to put a CD out, of course, but it's another thing then to be actually pushing that CD and to sort of be encouraging sales, and while it's still fresh off the press or still within a year old. So there's that aspect of management, whereas you can be out there playing a lot of shows, but selling CDs is kind of another thing again. Getting them onto radio stations and finding the single that you think is the most accessible.
Well, we've had a guy that's helping us push towards the management, and we're sort of in that area of trying to get that further along that line, and it's you get to this point where you really sort of, like you said, the teeing up of gigs is phrasing and sentences and how to use words properly.
Well, before I was ever a musician, I am a musician, by the way. I'm a drummer and percussion player, but before I ever was a musician, a late starter as I was actually a manager and a mixer for a band in Adelaide back in the sort of glorious early 80s days of live music. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed going to the pubs and the venues and the agencies, and some of the larger pubs were all tied up with agencies, and it was very hard to get in. But I wasn't in the band, so I had this particular energy. But of course, once you're actually in a band and it's your own work, getting out there and doing all that legwork, it's a little bit different. It's kind of your own. That's why it's nice to have somebody separate, I think.
Yeah, I think the separation is a good thing, because if you're talking about yourself, you sound like there's this guy, and you've got to try to separate yourself from yourself.
That's right.
And then also you're trying to be like sort of 5 people in one, and it gets really, really hard.
That's great. Well, look, it's fantastic to talk to you, Tim. And I know that you've got to go back to Queensland tomorrow, but we are going to, in the next segment, we're going to feature your music. And we look forward to seeing you as we return back from this break. It's Tim and it's Barney here with Nat Chat.
Phoenix is rising.